For the 6 fanart challenge, you take 6 characters from different or the same fandoms and draw them in your style. A while back I decided to also do this, but I wanted to put a twist on it. I drew 6 characters 9 times, based around 9 different hair colors, meaning I drew 55 characters overall. Hi, here's May, and for this video I'll talk about planning and preparing for this project, how I actually drew the characters, as well as what I learned from drawing them, since after drawing so many characters there should be a few things I learned over time, which were mainly about drawing heads at different angles. Let's start with the planning and preparing for drawing all the characters. My first inspiration to do this project was from seeing a post on Instagram where there were 6 fanarts based around different colors. I wanted to do this as well and decided to sort the characters by their hair colors for this. The characters I drew were from fandoms I personally like a lot. Some of my favorite things are male idol and sports anime, otome games, as well as you can probably tell from the many fanarts I've drawn for it already, Genshin Impact. Drawing the characters was really nice since I was discovering how multiple different fandoms stylized the characters, and I got to draw many faces, hairstyles or outfits I've never drawn before and adapt them to my own style. In the beginning I wanted to definitely draw all Obey Me characters as well as some B-project characters since I hadn't drawn them before. Then I decided on a few more fandoms by going through what I already liked to draw at the time, Genshin Impact and Ensemble Stars, and some of my favorite anime. From this I then added in characters from Idol 7, Kuroko's Basketball, Act Addict Actors, Skate Leading Stars, and Haikyuu, and I also added in one of my all-time favorite characters, which is Jack Frost. In my initial mood board I added in characters from even more fandoms, but I didn't draw any of them for now. I got references of all the characters and sorted them to the different colors. Initially I planned to do 12 versions with red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, pink, black, white, brown, grey and black a second time. That's why this mood board includes other colors as well, all sorted by their hair colors. I went with 9 colors though, leaving brown, grey and black out for now, since I already had most characters I wanted to draw included in the 9 colors and I didn't want to spend too long on this project since drawing characters in the same way over and over again can hold back improvement. Also, if I would do this challenge again sometime in the future, I had some other characters I could draw already. For the outfits I drew, I went with either the regular outfit the character would wear in-game, regular idol uniforms, or their team uniform for the sports anime. When it comes to drawing so many characters, I want to determine all the poses, or in this case the head angles beforehand. This saves me a lot of thinking time since I can focus all my energy on planning all character poses for a few hours and then just focus on drawing them. For my mermaid project, for example, I only had one of the 3 poses for each illustration figured out, and I spent half an hour to an hour figuring out the poses each time, which would be around 6 hours for 11 characters. For this project here, I spent maybe 3 hours on 2 days on coming up with the head angles, which was a lot faster. This is also similar to what I did for drawing more than 60 Genshin Impact characters an even longer time ago. What I considered for coming up and choosing the head angles was that the characters' head angles should all fit together nicely for each color as well as each fandom I chose to draw, and then a variety of head angles should be included so I could practice drawing heads at different angles. I also sorted lots of head sketches I already had from my daily drawings where I draw 3 heads each day to half of the head angles. This made the whole sketching process later a bit less time consuming, but it can be good to have something to experiment with for each illustration if it doesn't take up too much time and it makes drawing all the characters a bit more exciting. So here are the things I would change up while drawing and I didn't determine beforehand: the shoulders or the upper body angle, the hand poses, and for a few characters I also included variations where one eye would be closed or once I had 2 hand poses. Now after all the preparation was done, we move on to actually drawing the characters. For this part I'll show a quick time-lapse of all characters for one color at a time. I won't talk about each character individually since if I took around 1 minute for each one that would make this a 1-hour video. Instead I'll mention one aspect for each color that I focused on for the illustrations, and these are things you can also pay attention to for drawing portrait character illustrations. We start with blue-haired characters. Here I mentioned the head size compared to the body, or in this case mostly the upper body size. The younger the characters are, the bigger the heads are compared to the body usually. However, I often stylize the characters and their heads turn out a bit bigger than they initially are. To make sure the size would work, I would sketch in the pose from further away, including the full upper body, and I used other illustrations from this series as a reference often to make sure the proportions would stay around the same. Sometimes I would also sketch in the head without using guidelines at first, which is how I used to draw before learning more about the fundamentals, and back then the faces turned out wonky most of the time. Now it sometimes works out. It can be nice to test if your brain is able to fill in the facial features in the correct places on its own from time to time, but if it wasn't working, I'd just draw in guidelines on top to see where I was off to fix it. And from the blue hat characters, Jonghyun would be my favorite. Moving on to green head characters, and here I mentioned the head angle compared to the body angle. You can use a guideline you would place the eyes on, as well as a line from one shoulder to the other, at first to determine the angle of both the head and the shoulders to each other. If the body and head are angled differently, meaning the right shoulder is higher up than the left, while the left eye is higher up than the right, for example, it can make the whole pose look more dynamic. If the head and shoulders are also turned differently, meaning that would face to the left while the body would face to the right, for example, it can also look more interesting. But the pose always has to make sense and work with the neck. For me, drawing heads in a more downwards perspective, meaning you look at them from above, tends to be easier, while drawing heads looking upwards is harder. The same goes for me with the shoulders, so all the illustrations where the character would be more upwards tended to take me longer to draw than the ones where I used a more downwards head angle. For the next set of 6 characters, I'll talk about hands. I like drawing variations for the hand poses most of the time during this project, but this can take up a lot of time. I got to practice hands, which was nice, but I also didn't want to spend too long on drawing them. I also added in fingernails and hand line indications, which you can do as a stylistic choice. For the Obey Me characters, I could actually draw painted nails, which was really nice and enjoyable. You can see this here for the black hat characters, for Belphegor for example, but I didn't add a hand for Lucifer. I would often rely on the character's personality to choose a hand pose. If the character, for example, would be more energetic and outgoing, I would use a more open hand pose. Since I drew so many hands during this project, after some time I actually felt comfortable with coming up with some hand poses and not always relying on references. But references still help, especially for more difficult poses and coming up with ideas for hand poses. After the hands, we move on to talking about white-haired characters and eyes. Even if I was drawing guidelines, I sometimes had trouble with aligning the eyes on the face and their symmetry. At first I was unsure about the eye shading I wanted to use. I tried out a more painterly look, but I decided to change this later. I was trying out new things, but I realized I didn't like it that much, so one day I really just focused on getting references from characters where I like how the artist draw eyes and what I would like to use myself. I came up with a way I would want to draw the eyes for the rest of the project this way. For me, having clear steps when drawing is important, but from time to time experimenting is also good to develop as an artist. Here I also just want to mention that Mohisa, the Bee Project character, looks like the grown-up anime version of Jack Frost to me, which made me really happy when drawing him. It made it really enjoyable for some reason. And I also want to mention that Rio, the Skate Leading Stars character, has very unique lashes, and each character's eye shape was really interesting to look at, and how each fandom stylizes them, just like both the hair, which is what I'll talk about next for the pink-haired characters I drew. What helps me a lot when drawing hair is checking the volume by filling in the hair silhouette while sketching and comparing it to the other illustrations I made before. After figuring out how I wanted to shade the eyes, I noticed that I also didn't like how I shaded the hair that much. The zigzag shapes and using lots of painterly strokes was what I wasn't that happy with, so I repeated the process of looking at inspirations for the hair. Asmodeus and Muku have some of my favorite hairstyles from all the ones I drew here. Muku's hair looks really fluffy, like ice cream for some reason to me, and Yusha has freckles, which is very unique. He was probably the first character I've ever drawn that has freckles, other than Grant from the Dragon Prince, which I drew very, very long ago. Just like with eyes, how each fandom stylizes it, especially through the amount of strands or shading and hair highlights, was really interesting to see. And next, let's talk about adapting to each fandom's style for the purple-haired characters. The iris size is what would often help with conveying the age of the character. It was what's different about each fandom often. The Idolish 7, Obey Me, Kuroko's Basketball and Bee Project characters have a bit smaller irises, for example, since the characters there were a bit older, while for the Skate Leading Stars, Genshin Impact or Ensemble Stars characters, the irises were a bit bigger. The face width was also something I paid attention to. Older characters often have thinner faces, while for younger characters they are wider. The eyebrows were often a big factor for each character as well. Yusa here, for example, had a pretty different face from most of the other characters I drew, since he has more of a masculine face with a wider jaw, thicker eyebrows, and a nose that's more downwards turned. I sometimes like to visualize a little slider that goes from cute to masculine or handsome, and pretty or hot is somewhere in between. For example, I would place the Skate Leading Stars stars and ensemble stars characters more on the cute side, and the Kuroko's basketball and Obey Me characters more on the handsome side. I used the same shading for drawing all the characters, even though the shading for each fandom was often a bit different. What stood out to me was that for both the sports anime Haikyuu and Kuroko's basketball, they used a black shadow on the neck. And if you know Genshin Impact, you probably know that Ayato has rather blue hair and not purple. I added him here though, since I wanted to include one Genshin Impact character for each color. He has the closest color to purple for me for male Genshin Impact characters. Moving on to the outfits and red hat characters. During this project I got to draw many different outfits. About half of them were idol outfits, and I'll mention some things about them here. Overall, black and white tend to be most commonly used in these outfits, since they can be easily paired with more individual colors for each character. Most idol anime, each character has an image color assigned to them, which often also is the hair or the eye color the character has. What was really nice to me here were the outfits for the Brie project characters. They had variations of a similar outfit featuring black, white and blue for each group, but also for each character. For example, the group Killer King had a white and black necktie, while for the other groups it was blue and white. This was similar with the Idolish 7 outfits. They had the same theme, but varied in how the jacket is cut and what outfit pieces are included for each character. But here the outfits also included each character's image color. Speaking of colors, we now move on to the color orange. I like to use purpley, bluish and pinkish colors often. However, I had gotten a new drawing tablet when I was working on this project, which led to me seeing the colors not accurately. Maybe you'll notice that the illustrations tend to look a bit yellowish sometimes, especially when I would use a warmer background color. I changed this up after I finished the illustrations through adding a soft light pink layer over all of them. Also, when I would pick the colors for drawing each character, I wouldn't color pick from my references. I prefer to just pick a color myself from looking at the character. For greenish or warmer colors, I tend to make them more purpley by shifting the hue slightly, and then I pay attention to that the other colors match to it, so it resembles the original colors of the character. But an easier way to do this is to just color pick from a reference and then add a soft light layer, or you can use any other layer mode. You can experiment here. And yeah, you add this layer with one color on top of all the colors you pick. This way all the colors will have the same relation to each other, but you can adjust the overall aesthetic and mood of them. But I also have to say I don't like how the green, red, orange and yellow haired characters turned out that much just color-wise, simply because I don't like the colors that much and I haven't used them in my art often, which meant it was sometimes difficult to figure out how to make them work with the colors I'd usually use. And finally, for yellow, I'll talk about lighting. The first characters I drew were from Obey Me and Idolish 7. I sometimes added some different lighting variations here, but I didn't continue to do this for more illustrations later on, since for one, I don't like them that much, since for adding lighting it makes sense to have an idea, an environment or a nice background that works with it, and these illustrations didn't have a specific background, so having different lighting when lining them all up would be confusing. Also, I don't learn that much from adding the lighting, it was just too time consuming, so I decided to only do basic shading on the illustrations, but I included more specific layer shading for the skin, eyes and hair. For the outfits I would always just use one multiply layer on top of each color though. That's it for talking about all the colors and characters. And after I had drawn all the illustrations, I also made some edit like reels for each color. I personally enjoy editing videos a lot and used to make shorter edits of characters, so this was nice to do. Now I move on to what I learned or tips for drawing many fan arts. I wrote down notes using Notion while drawing the characters, and I had some categories in a table there, which included comment, the MBTI type of the character, the color, the fandom, as well as fix. And fix was for things I wanted to fix when exporting the illustrations. It was about things that didn't look that nice to me anymore after looking at the character again sometime after drawing it. And the category was really helpful to notice my general struggles. For example, I wrote down that I was unsure about the neck to shoulder transition, which I then focused on in my drawing practice time to get over these struggles. It's important to me to reflect on what I'm drawing for once directly after drawing the illustration, so I still have the thoughts I had while drawing the character in mind, as well as after some time where I can solely focus on how the illustration looks to me. From this I like to figure out what I can focus on improving on. It's a bit like giving yourself a critique, but I recommend asking others, especially people that are experienced in drawing what you draw, for feedback when you have the chance, since they can often bring new things to the table. Here are some common issues I noticed I had while drawing the characters, and just as a small information beforehand, I did this whole project before the Mermaid Genshin Impact project, so I hope the parts I'm mentioning here will look better in the illustrations there. And for one, drawing the characters with no bangs was a bit difficult since I haven't drawn characters with a hairstyle like that not that often. And I also almost never draw characters facing from the back, so the shoulders and neck here were difficult to me. Then I often drew too long necks. And for heads looking upwards, the hair volume tended to be too small, which made the character not look that much like an anime character and more realistic. When I'm drawing heads that look more upwards, making the facial features look nice is something I struggled with and I'm still struggling with. Even though I've already included a lot more heads looking upwards in my daily drawing practice, it will probably just take some more time to figure this out. Now we move on to the next aspect I learned from doing this project. For some time I drew 2 characters each day and for some time 3, and the ones I spent more time on turned out better most of the time, so it's important to not rush through illustrations, especially for projects like this where you're drawing many characters. Of course, there should also be a point where you move on even if you're not completely satisfied, but I myself tend to struggle with rushing too much and not stopping. Looking at the drawing, observing it to figure out what could look better, so I should increase the observation for my observation to drawing ratio. The eye shape and hairstyle was what was mainly important to get right to make the character look like them, and the face shape was also what changed sometimes, but I used basically the same noses and mouths for all the characters. For fun, and since I had it as a category in my Notion, I'd also show all the MBTI types of the characters I drew. I really like the MBTI, and in case you're interested in hearing what each type stands for, I'll put some video recommendations here. I even drew the MBTI types as characters some time ago and talked more about each one in the videos from this, but I'd maybe like to do this again since my art has developed from them and it was very fun to do. You can also leave a comment with the characters you like the most in general or for each color. In the future, I'd probably like to do the 6 fanarts challenge again, only drawing 6 characters. If I do that, I would probably talk more about each individual character, what I think about them, and their design and how it was to draw them in more detail. You can leave some names for characters you'd like to see me draw for a video like this in the future. Thanks a lot for watching and have a nice day. Bye!